I will get us started, I think. Welcome to everyone who is joining us, who has joined and is joining us. We welcome you to our first webinar in our symposium series on Public Research University Futures. I'm Ann Austin, a professor of higher adult and lifelong education at Michigan State University, and I welcome you along with my colleague Brendan Cantwell, who currently holds the Erickson Chair in Higher Adult and Lifelong Education at Michigan State. We're very pleased to host this webinar, which is sponsored by MSU's Center for Higher and Adult Education. Brendan is going to be facilitating much of the discussion today and will also be assisted by Travis Olson, one of our doctoral students. As we get started, I wanted to express our appreciation for support for this series from the offices of the President, the Provost, and the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at Michigan State. Today's webinar is part of our project on Public Research University Futures. Our higher education institutions, I'm sure we'd all agree, are unique organizations in American history and society, and they have very important missions. First, they create and advance knowledge, and they also translate that knowledge in ways that enrich lives, that strengthen our communities, and that address the daunting challenges and opportunities confronting our world. And they additionally have the mission to prepare learners to be engaged citizens and capable members of the workforce, as well as to live meaningful lives. While we recognize, what one does not want to happen in a webinar is have their machine run out of energy. There we go. Well, we recognize and value the unique ways in which every institutional type across our array of missions is contributing. We're envisioning this seminar series as an opportunity to focus particularly on public research universities and to discuss their roles and responsibilities amid the changes, the challenges, and the opportunities of the 21st century. Our specific goal in this series is to identify, to frame, and to elevate questions. We want to focus on questions that deserve attention by higher education leaders, whether they be administrative, faculty, or other leaders in our universities. We note that we recognize very much that the current context is raising many concerns and issues for all higher education institutions and much uncertainty. Our conversations are certainly informed by these immediate issues. At the same time, however, in this seminar series, we want to take a more expansive view. Our intention is to provide a space to discuss enduring questions about the roles and responsibilities of our public research universities. And we see them again as unique entities in our nation and in our broader world. We think that deep thinking about the purposes of our public research universities, about their responsibilities across their missions, and how they can best fulfill those responsibilities may be especially important in times of uncertainty and challenge. So we're very, very pleased that you're joining us and reflecting on these important questions that we'll be identifying, that we hope will help us and be in the forefront of our thinking and work on our campus, in our campus environments. Very briefly, let me just give a little bit of an overview of the whole symposium series. Today, of course, we're focusing on the landscape for public research universities and their roles and responsibilities in that landscape. We wanted to alert you and invite you to our second webinar, which will occur on April 30th. That one will begin at noon Eastern Time, an hour earlier, and that will focus on important questions pertaining to the changing nature of the academic profession. You can see it highlighted here, and you can see the QR code for registration. We plan to continue this series next year with other topics that relate to the mission and the work of public research universities. And we wanted to let you know that following each webinar, our speakers have generously agreed to each write a short essay on the particular question that they have chosen to highlight that you'll be hearing about today. And we'll compile those questions in a white paper. There'll be one after each webinar. And those will be available a month or so following the webinar. We hope that these essays, these white papers that compile them, may be useful perhaps for conversations on your own campuses. And also, we wanted to note that each webinar is being recorded, and the recordings and the white papers will be made available through the website of the Center for Higher and Adult Education at Michigan State. We will be emailing all registrants so that you can have access to those as soon as they're ready. So again, I want to very much welcome each of you, and I want to offer my appreciation for your taking time in what we know is a particularly busy period in our work lives. And I also want to thank our distinguished speakers, whom Brendan Cantwell will introduce in just a moment. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Interim Provost Thomas Yaitzko, who will offer a few words of welcome. We're so glad that Thomas can join us, and I'd like to turn it over to you at this point, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. Thanks for that kind introduction. Many thanks to you and Dr. Cantwell for facilitating this symposium series, which is hosted by MSU's Center for Higher and Adult Education. Many thanks also to everyone taking part in today's webinar, Situating Public Research Universities in Today's Landscape, the first in this series. And finally, special thanks to the panelists joining us today for engaging with us and sharing their time, their insights, and their experiences. It's wonderful to welcome you all on behalf of Michigan State University. MSU holds a distinctive role in U.S. higher education history, including leadership in tackling big challenges and excellence in higher education research. Our Higher Adult and Lifelong Education, or HALE program, is consistently ranked in the nation's top 10 higher education programs. The HALE doctoral program prepares some of the strongest, most well-equipped leaders in higher education. And HALE's innovative curriculum challenges students to critically analyze current research, develop their instruction and pedagogical approaches, and discover ways to advance the field of higher education. While public research universities are no doubt experiencing some unique challenges as a result of recent executive orders and agency directives, I'm confident that we'll navigate our way through this together and come out stronger for it. And while we no doubt have to address matters arising, we also need to maintain a strong and deliberate focus on the long view and to remain grounded in our founding missions, our core values, and our long-term aspirations. Clear and cogent thinking about roles and responsibilities will become increasingly important as we move into the future. Dialogue, reflection, and being in community will continue to ground us and to guide us. This symposium series provides a wonderful opportunity for engaging in thoughtful, deliberative, and generative dialogue, and for engaging in reflection with our higher education colleagues. I'm confident that today's webinar will prove to be a successful and rewarding launch of the series. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Dr. Brendan Cantwell for his remarks and the introduction of today's panelists.
Hello and good afternoon. As Provost Yaitzko indicated, I'm Brendan Cantwell, a professor in the Department of Educational Administration at Michigan State University. Thanks to Professor Austin for introducing our project and for Provost Yaitzko for situating our work within Michigan State. It's my pleasure to introduce our webinar today. Professor Austin indicated we believe that higher education, and especially the public research universities that we all care about, have entered a period of challenge, change, and opportunity. Public research universities are important now to their communities and states, to the country, and to the world, and they're as important now as they ever have been. At the same time, questions about who is included, how university priorities are established, as well as about their costs, social and economic returns, these questions have been building for years. We hope our project will inspire creative and innovative thinking about how to respond to these and other questions. Of course, the past couple of months have made it clear that the established relationship between public research universities and the federal and state governments is changing and being renegotiated. The tick-tock of daily events creates a sense of frenetic urgency and sometimes encourages short-term thinking. Today, we want to resist short-term thinking. The aim of our webinar, entitled Situating Public Research Universities in Today's Landscape, is designed to step back from the hour-by-hour demands put on our attention and take stock of the bigger picture. What are the major questions that public research universities face today? And what do these questions apply about how the sector can fulfill its mission in the medium and longer terms? Allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists. And they are, as you will soon hear, very distinguished. I'll introduce them in alphabetical order by last name. Dominique Baker, Dr. Dominique Baker is Associate Professor of Education and Public Policy in the College of Education and Human Development and Joseph R. Biden Jr. School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. Dr. Baker's work focuses on the way that education policy affects and shapes the access and success of minoritized students in higher education. She primarily investigates student financial aid, admissions policies, and policies that influence the creation of an inclusive and equitable campus climate. Her work has been published in a variety of journals, including the American Educational Research Journal, the Education Evaluation and Policy Analysis, Educational Researcher, the Journal of Higher Education, and the Journal of College Student Development. Her work and expertise have been highlighted by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, among others. Dr. Baker has also testified before the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, Subcommittee on Economic Policy on Race, Racism, and Student Loans. She is also a member of the Board of Higher Education and Workforce within the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. She has been recognized as an American Educational Research Association Early Career Award winner, a National Academy of Education and Spencer Foundation postdoctoral fellow, and is a past recipient of the Association for Education, Finance, and Policy's Early Career Award and the Association for the Study of Higher Education's Excellence in Public Policy Award. Welcome, Dr. Baker. Our next panelist will be Dr. Jenny Lee. Dr. Jenny Lee is at the University of Arizona, where she serves as Vice President for Arizona International, Dean of International Education, Professor of Higher Education. Dr. Lee is a thought leader in global higher education, recognized as among the world's top 2% of the most cited scholars in her field. She is author of over 150 publications, including her award-winning edited book, Power in U.S. International Education. Her research examines the global diffusion of higher education, specifically how migration policies, geopolitics, and social forces shape inequalities in the U.S. and abroad. Dr. Lee's expertise is regularly sought after by national and international news outlets, including NPR, Nature, Science, the New York Times, The Atlantic, ABC, and the Wall Street Journal, among others. She is a fellow of the American Education Research Association. She formerly served as senior fellow of the Association of International Educators, NASFA, and the chair for the as chair for the Council of International Higher Education. As a member of the Board of Directors for the Association of the Study, and as a member of the Board of Directors for the Association of the Study of Higher Education. So many distinguished things. It's hard for me to keep up here. Additionally, Dr. Lee has served as U.S. Fulbright Scholar to South Africa, a distinguished global professor at Korea University, and an international visiting scholar at the City University of London, the University of Pretoria, and the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Welcome, Dr. Lee. Dr. Chris Long is Provost and Senior Vice President at the University of Oregon, where he also has an appointment as Collins Professor of Philosophy. Recognized for value-enacted leadership, Provost Long is committed to the transformative power of liberal arts research and teaching by enriching graduate and undergraduate education, recruiting and retaining world-class faculty, and creating new opportunities for leading-edge research. He has more than 20 years of academic leadership experience from the public research universities of Michigan State University and Penn State. Provost Long has led projects supported in total by more than $8 million, including the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and Andrew W. Mellon Foundation funded Values Enacted Leadership Institute to support a collaborative approach to institutional change that puts values at the center of decision-making, policy, creation, and daily practice. The Mellon funded less commonly taught and indigenous languages partnership with the Big Ten Academic Alliance, a participatory research initiative and teaching framework developed in reciprocal partnership with indigenous communities and institutions across the Big Ten. The Public Philosophy Journal, an innovative online publication for accessible scholarship that deepens our understanding of publicly relevant issues, and the Humetrics HHS, a values enacted initiative committed to transforming higher education by aligning indicators of academic excellence with core personnel and institutional values. As an expert in both Greek and contemporary continental philosophy, Provost Long's extensive publication record includes 4 books: The Ethics of Ontology by SUNY Press, Aristotle on the Nature of Truth, published by Cambridge University Press, Socrates and Platonic Political Philosophy, Practicing the Politics of Reading, also published by Cambridge University Press, and Renner Sherman and the Poetics of Politics, Practicum Press. Welcome, Provost Long. Jennifer Mnookin is Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Mordridge Friends Distinguished Chair and Leadership and a Professor of Law. Dr. Mnookin is the 13th leader of the University of Wisconsin-Madison's 176-year history and one of the nation's top legal scholars. Chancellor Mnookin is dedicated to pushing boundaries and bringing the university to new levels of excellence in research and education, and to energize and expand the Wisconsin idea. UW-Madison's commitment to innovating for the public good. She recently launched an ambitious cross-campus initiative called Wisconsin RISE, and RISE stands for Research, Innovation, and Scholarly Excellence, to expand educational opportunities and research at UW-Madison around significant complex challenges affecting Wisconsin and the world. She has championed initiatives to increase access to UW-Madison, creating Bucky's Pell Pathway, under which the university pledges to meet the full financial needs of Wisconsin resident undergraduates who qualify for Pell Grants. Prior to coming to Wisconsin, Chancellor Mnookin served as Dean of the UCLA School of Law and was Professor of Law at the University of Virginia and Harvard University. Chancellor Mnookin is a nationally recognized scholar at the intersection of law and science. She serves on the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's Committee on Science, Technology, and Law, and recently co-chaired the National Academy's report on facial recognition technologies. Welcome, Chancellor Mnookin. Dr. Teresa Woodruff of Michigan State University is President Emerita of MSU, MSU Research Foundation Professor of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Biology and Biomedical Engineering. Dr. Woodruff served as Michigan State's Provost from 2020 to 2022 and Interim President from 2022 to 2024. Dr. Woodruff is an internationally recognized expert in ovarian biology and reproductive science. In 2006, she coined the term oncofertility to describe the merging of 2 fields, oncology and fertility. Working at the national level, Woodruff championed a new National Institutes of Health policy mandating the inclusion of both male and female biological variables in fundamental research. As a leading research scientist, teacher, and mentor, Dr. Woodruff was awarded the National Medal of Science by President Biden in 2025 and the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science Mentoring by President Obama in 2011. Woodruff is recipient of the Endocrine Society's 2021 Laureate Award, a top honor that recognizes the highest achievements in the field of endocrinology. She holds 19 U.S. patents and is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Medicine, the National Academy of Inventors, the American Institute for Medical and Biomedical Engineering, and the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. Welcome, Dr. Woodruff. So as you can see, we have a really excellent panel. Each panelist will have about 10 minutes to present a pressing question they believe is vital for administrative leaders and faculty to consider in regard to public research universities and their roles in the broader landscape. We will hear from them in alphabetical order by last name, and I will introduce each panelist. After we have heard from all panelists, we will have a lightning round in which each panelist will have 1 to 2 minutes to offer comment in response to the overall discussion or specifically in response to another panelist. We will use the remainder of our time to field questions. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A or chat. My colleague Travis Olson, a Hill doctoral candidate, will monitor those feeds and bring questions to our attention for the Q&A session at the end. We're very glad that you're joining us, and it's now time to turn it over to our first panelist. Dr. Baker, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank y'all so much for having us. And I am taking our timing seriously. So I'm starting my timer on my phone to make sure that I am tracking along, because anybody who knows an academic knows what is time. So we're starting off thinking about my research question, and it can sort of be summed up by the slide that you see right there. Public research universities. So when I first was asked about this webinar, which is titled Exploring the Public Research University Landscape, one of my first questions was, well, so what's a public research university? And Dr. Austin and Dr. Cantwell were both kind enough to say, you can ask that question if you would like. And I said, I would love to. Now, I am not the philosophy expert on this panel, but, dipping my toes a little bit into thinking about what does it mean to be a public research university, I thought, what if we started with thinking about like, okay, how do most people think about defining public research universities? And when I thought about that, I realized, oh, that's a little bit close to what Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said for a different topic that I know it when I see it. That most of the time when we are talking about public research universities, we don't necessarily define what we actually mean. We say public research university, and we expect everyone else to sort of know what we're talking about. So I thought, what if we take a couple of definitions of public research universities and we see, do we always get the same set of institutions when we think about those different definitions? So I pulled out 3. So one is the Association of American Universities, or the AAU. And I wanted to see, okay, what does it take to be a member of the AAU, right? And this is a mix of, so not yet, Travis, I'll let you know when. Don't worry, y'all, there are maps. I spent time in Excel and Stata and R. Don't you worry. I've got fresh data for you. But so we start with the AAU, right? And that is a mix of things like competitive funding from the feds, looking at faculty awards, fellowships, citations, books, looking at doctoral production and postdoc opportunities. And we can sort of think of the AAU, right, as a select group of really research-focused institutions. And so then I thought, okay, well, what's a different definition? We could think of like Carnegie classifications, right? Those are what we often think of when we say something like, oh, that's an R1 or an R2 institution, right? Well, technically, that involves institutions that have produced a certain number of doctoral degrees and have won and spent a certain amount of money, typically from the feds, in excess of $5 million. And so there's this mixture, right, where these institutions are generally both producing doctoral students and earning a certain amount of money in grants. And when we think about those distinctions between R1 and R2, we're typically thinking about how much money is spent in science and engineering, how much money is spent on sort of staffing up people that work within science and engineering. There is some measures around non-science and engineering fields, but if you look at them, it's heavily weighted toward those areas. And then I thought, okay, so we've got AAU, this is sort of this really select group. And then we've got Carnegie classification, which is sort of a broad strokes idea of what are like really research focused institutions. But what if we also looked at the higher education research and development data? This is data that looks at institutions that have spent at least $151 and spent at least $150,000 in research grants. So I don't know, if you have a grant for $200,000 from the feds, like, okay, is that a research university? Is that not a research university? So I wanted to see, okay, Travis, hit it. So first up, we have a map that shows you the most recent set of AAU institutions. I have included a gradient on this. All right, darker purples are smaller numbers of institutions in a state. And when you get up into greens and yellows, you're getting larger numbers into the 30s and 40s. Obviously, we know that there are different sizes of populations across these states, right? But just as a rough and dirty, you can see automatically that if you're looking at the public AAU institutions, we can see that it's a bit patchy across the country. Not all states have a public research university if we are only considering AAU. Can we go to the next slide, please? So then we think, okay, what if we check out R1 institutions? Okay, we're starting to get some more. And of course, this is just the contiguous United States. Alaska and Hawaii are things. But you can see that we're starting to get more states with coverage, but we still don't have all states. If we said we are going to consider public research universities to be R1 institutions, that does not cover all states in the United States. Next slide, please. So let's say that we add in R2 institutions. Okay, so now all of the contiguous states are covered, but we can also see that there's like a wide variation in how many institutions there are in each state. It's sort of what we would expect a little bit, right? That California and Texas are sort of at the forefront of this. They are also some of our largest states, right? But there is a difference between California and Texas. And as for an example, Florida. Florida has a very similar population, a very similar number of institutions as well. So we do see that there is still variation, even if we are taking into consideration the population. So then we can also think, next slide, please. Okay, let's go to the HERD definition, right? That's just institutions with at least $150,000. And when we look at that, we can see that now we have all institutions covered, but we're actually starting to get into those yellows and greens. So it's when we change our definition to thinking about what institutions have at least $150,000, that's when we can see enough of a change that we see that, oh, there's like a concentration of public research institutions in certain states. You can stop sharing. Thank you. So that to me says that the definition we use for what is a public research institution, like that matters a ton. It really changes our understanding of which institutions we're talking about, who we're talking about in the country, all of those pieces. And so I really want us to push to think like, who are we talking about when we say what a public research university is? Because that can really shift. And I also want to know, even with all those different definitions that we saw, every one of them mentioned federal research dollars. And I think that's an incredibly important thing that my colleagues will spend more time unpacking a little bit as we talk about that research side. But one of the things I want to highlight is that means if we have public institutions that are doing all of the philosophy research, all of the English research and the history research possible, by most definitions, they likely would still not be a public research university because the realities of federal research dollars are such that that primarily goes to the STEM fields. So I just wanted to highlight that, but I'm going to let my colleagues get a chance to do more deep dives into that research part of sort of what is a public research university. And I'll stick on this part of like, well, what makes a university public? That is a really interesting challenge to me because I think when you ask most people, what they will say is, oh, it's the money that they get, right? So public universities, they get a certain amount of money from the state, and that's what makes them public, right? My employer, the University of Delaware, would beg to differ. That is very similar to the University of Michigan, that there are, or Penn State, there are institutions that are public institutions who, if you actually look at their budgets, you would actually consider them to be privates. In fact, in federal data, when you look at the University of Delaware, their finance information is listed underneath private institutions because the finances of the University of Delaware mirror a private institution, not a public institution. So if it's not the money, I would argue that it must be about the mission, that there's something about the mission of public institutions that ties them together. And especially so when we're talking about public research institutions, that there is this extra enhancement that is happening. And that's tough because with all the vast stakeholders for public research universities, you're never going to please all of them. It's very challenging. The different stakeholder groups have different wants, wishes, dreams, and desires for public research universities. And so that means this becomes a really difficult road to think about sort of who is our public and how do we satisfy them as a public research university. And what I want to sort of close out with is a historical note. So these sort of like four time points that I want us to think about for public research universities when we think about who is the public. So the first is Newark College, which is now the University of Delaware. So in the 1830s, the first Black person to earn a bachelor's degree from a state flagship institution does so from my employer. In the 1850s, the University of Iowa becomes the first public institution to go co-ed. So we see that in the 1830s and the 1850s, we've got public institutions that are beginning to fulfill the promise, if not the intentions behind our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, with thinking about how they educate their publics. But even though those things happened in the 1830s and the 1850s, and yes, I'm so good with time, we still have that the University of Texas at Austin in 1950 was at the center of Sweat v. Painter, which, while everyone talks about Brown v. Board, one of my favorite court cases is Sweat v. Painter, where a gentleman was denied attendance at the University of Texas at Austin and sued. And this is one of the key precedents that allow Brown v. Board to be decided the way it was. And so I always try to remind people that it's not just K-12, that higher ed had a critical role to play in the legal desegregation of our country. But that happened in 1950. And in 1970, my own alma mater, the University of Virginia, officially allowed the undergraduate school to go co-ed. So that means that even though in the 1830s and the 1850s, we were having our first women and our first Black person doing things, in the 1950s and the 1970s, we were still seeing public research universities as structural barriers to integration within our country. That they were working to actually help segregate our country. So what I leave you with is, if the mission is what unites public research universities, it seems difficult to see how institutions that retrench on the stated aims of free inquiry, of integration, and democracy could ever consider themselves to be public. Thank you all. I look forward to hearing from the rest of you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baker. Dr. Lee.
All right. Well, just to begin, thank you, Anne. Thank you, Brendan, for bringing us together to discuss the future of public research universities in today's ever-shifting political climate. So following Dr. Baker's presentation, I will be using the broadest possible definition of a public research university with the intention that my remarks will apply broadly. So I'd like to begin with an exercise, and I'd like for you, I don't have slides, so you can close your eyes, but please try not to doze off. Think back to a group project, whether this be in class or at work, and where you had members who didn't communicate or pull their weight. So among all the high achievers here in this Zoom room and in this time together, I assume many of you here have experienced the unfortunate consequence of deadline slipping and the project falling apart. Now imagine involving higher education institutions around the world coming together to address our most pressing global challenges, not just resulting in a bad grade, but setbacks in research, innovation, and progress. So this is what happens when universities around the world stop collaborating. And what I'm describing here is not a thought experiment. It is a real possibility if international engagement continues to be challenged. As Brendan mentioned, I was a former professor of a couple of decades and recently started as a senior international officer at the University of Arizona. And I've witnessed firsthand how research informs policy, policy shape research. And so with these two ends in mind and the broad audience joining us here, I want to focus on two key questions. Number one, why should public research universities engage globally? And number two, what are the risks and strategies in the era of international decoupling? So as we're experiencing rising populism in the US and abroad, we must ask, does internationalization even belong in our universities anymore? And to answer that, we need to understand public sentiment, even if we don't always agree with the majority. public opinion on immigration has grown more restrictive, with 55% supporting deportation and reducing immigration, and this is the highest it's been in several decades. The same 2024 Gallup poll reported a sharp 30-point increase in just the past 4 years of Americans disfavoring immigration. However, attitudes towards international students are different. According to the American Council on Education, most Americans acknowledge their economic and intellectual contributions and support retaining our most skilled international graduates. So a quick story. I was on the local TV news recently, and I was trying to convince viewers that international students matter. And the anchor looked quite skeptical until I explained that they bring in billions of dollars. And then suddenly I had their attention. In fact, in Arizona, over 27,000 international students support over 8,000 jobs and contribute to more than $900 million to the state. Nationwide, our internationals generate over $43 billion. These numbers make a strong case to policymakers and broad audiences, regardless of their political affiliation. But beyond economics, our international students and scholars drive innovation. The IE Open Doors report shows that over 112,000 international scholars were engaged in U.S. research, teaching, and clinical work over the past year. And here's a surprising statistic you may not know. The NSF reports that 40% of U.S. STEM publications have international co-authors. And this percentage has been growing over time, indicating our country's increasing dependence on internationals for our research output, which allows us to maintain our dominant position in science. These collaborations actually start oftentimes when these scholars are graduate students or postdocs. A few years ago, my students and I conducted a study on U.S.-China research collaborations during COVID, and it also happened to be at the height of the FBI's China Initiative. We interviewed and surveyed over 200 co-authors across both countries, and our findings were not what I initially expected. We found that partnerships persisted not simply because of contractual obligations, but because of trust. This trust was built over years and decades, and often started in graduate school. Research breakthroughs often depend on these relationships, which then leverages access to unique data, specialized knowledge, and state-of-the-art research facilities, the core elements of scientific discovery. Our domestic students in the U.S. also benefit, even if they never leave the country. International students bring diverse perspectives, and they enrich our classroom discussions. Regardless of citizenship and location, all students gain from learning new languages and cultural perspectives, thereby preparing them for a globally connected workforce. International students also boost university retention rates, enhance our STEM graduate programs, and they contribute to global university rankings. Yet while many here and others that are joining us understand these benefits, we need to do a much better job communicating them. This means addressing public concerns head-on, concerns like the competition for university spots, threats to national security, and global scientific competition. Universities must remain agile, pursuing international engagement while not neglecting state and local needs. In fact, international engagement and state needs are positive, not zero-sum pursuits. The second question is, what are the risks of international decoupling, and how should universities respond? There are, first of all, no clear answers about the future of U.S. alliances. Your guess is as good as mine. Current tensions obviously exist, and how they'll affect collaboration, student exchange, offshore student education, all of that remains uncertain. Strained relations with China, a potential Afghan travel ban, tensions with the EU, Mexico, Canada, all of these have serious implications. Universities, of course, must comply with federal and state policies. And while there may be students and faculty who may pressure institutions to resist, the reality is that institutional leaders face hard choices in terms of serious financial appropriation and job-related consequences for doing so. So what can universities do? While most Americans recognize the value of international students, public opinion is complex, demanding thoughtful responses instead of sweeping broad restrictions. Like smart financial investors who diversify to reduce risk, universities should also expand global engagement to stay resilient. Short-term challenges are inevitable, but universities must take a long-term view, building sustainable partnerships through students, alumni, faculty, and staff, and enlarging our global connections. For university leaders and senior international officers, we must continue to articulate our value proposition to all stakeholders, especially of the broader public, and why we exist and how we serve society through our strategy, policy, and public messaging. Among these messages is that our international students and scholars are not a liability. They are an asset. They fuel research, economic growth, and American leadership in innovation. At the same time, the researchers play a critical role in separating facts from myths. Our work should not just inform our scholarly communities, but leaders in decision-making, as well as celebrate the contributions of our international collaborations, without whom many of our studies would not have been possible. In closing, the challenges we face are not just about survival. They are about leadership and progress. If we want to advance knowledge and serve society, we must engage globally, not despite the challenges, but because of them. Internationalization is not a luxury. It is not optional. It is essential for innovation, economic prosperity, and preparing students for an interconnected world. While public sentiment may shift, our mission remains to communicate the value of global engagement, to adapt wisely, and to ensure that knowledge knows no borders. If knowledge knows no borders, neither should the institutions that create it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. I appreciate your comments. And we're now going to turn to Provost Long.
Thank you, Brendan. And it's a pleasure to be with everyone. Still morning here on the West Coast, so this morning. Lately, I have returned to Plato's Apology, that compelling account of the trial of Socrates, in which the citizens of Athens find him guilty of impiety and corrupting the youth and sentence him to death. There's a moment in that dialogue that has always struck me as visionary. It comes just after the Athenians have found Socrates guilty and his accusers have proposed death as the proper penalty. Socrates suggests, however, that the most fitting penalty for the life he has led, attempting to orient each citizen and the city itself to what is true and just and beautiful, would be for the city to provide him with public maintenance in the Prytaneum, the most sacred and honored place of the city. Of all the things Socrates says in that dialogue, this was perhaps the most provocative, and it likely cost him his life. We might, however, trace the idea of the public research university to this very provocation, for it invites us to imagine what it might mean to situate the search for truth and the love of wisdom at the very heart of the political life of the city, so that the city and its citizens might cultivate the habits of dialogue and the discovery that enrich our relationships with one another and deepen our understanding of the world we share. Strangely enough, in the late 18th and throughout the 19th century in the United States, the citizens somehow saw the value of setting up public research universities to serve the public good in the twofold way Socrates served the city of Athens, through research and education, by exploring and generating new ideas, and by teaching future citizens to discern how to live a meaningful life. And even if they do not speak the language of Socrates, this twofold purpose finds its voice. We hear of research in the 1894 statement of the Regents of the University of Wisconsin, Jennifer, a nod to you and your university, which insists that the university, quote, should ever encourage that continual and fearless sifting and winnowing by which alone the truth can be found, end quote. And we hear of education in 1862, during the Civil War, when the Morrill Land-Grant Act promises, quote, to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life, end quote. The legacy we have inherited from Socrates and from this tradition is to create, sustain, and defend the public research university as a sacred space of inquiry and learning at the heart of the political life of these United States. To call the university a sacred space is not to infuse it with a holiness founded upon religious dogma, but to recall the connotations of the Latin sacrare, which means to set apart and to dedicate. The university is set apart as a space dedicated to the search for truth and the cultivation of the habits of dialogue and thinking that awaken us to the world and enliven our relationships with one another. The university is a sacred space for thinking in its most active voice. Thinking acts in a very peculiar way, not by imposing ideas upon the circumstances at hand, but by creating or revealing something new. The activity of thinking is rooted in what Hannah Arendt calls the human condition of natality, the capacity to bring something new into the world. Thinking thus acts in public in unpredictable ways. And this is one reason ideologues and demagogues find universities so dangerous and seek to control them. The university, however, can only be a catalyst for new and unexpected ideas if it is protected and sustained as a sphere of free inquiry, intellectual humility, and responsible dialogue. If the activity of thinking shapes the research life of the university, the spiritual practice of learning shapes its educational life. I use the term spirituality here in the sense in which Parker Palmer speaks of authentic spirituality in his book, To Know as We Are Known, when he writes, quote, authentic spirituality wants to open us to truth, whatever truth may be, wherever truth may take us. Such a spirituality does not dictate where we must go, but trusts that any path walked with integrity will take us to a place of knowledge. Such a spirituality encourages us to welcome diversity and conflict, to tolerate ambiguity, and to embrace paradox, end quote. Fear of uncertainty, ambiguity, and difference, Palmer reminds us, destroys the space of learning and inquiry. Such fear undermines our capacity for Socratic courage, the wisdom to know we do not know, and thus must continue to seek truth together. To seek truth is not to presume to possess it. Truth is subverted when it is made into an instrument of positional power. For the power of truth lies in its capacity to draw us together in a common endeavor of searching and researching. The public research university can only fulfill its promise as a public good by maintaining, protecting, and cultivating the conditions under which a community of truth seekers can take root and grow. This requires, however, a values-enacted approach to leadership that is as difficult as it is powerful. The difficulty lies in remaining always attentive to the deeper purpose of the university, to its core values of free inquiry, intellectual humility, and responsible dialogue, even and especially when the dissonant noise of positional politics seeks to deplete our energy, divert our attention, and pervert the purpose of the university from a common and public good to an instrument of partisan political politics. The power, however, of values enacted leadership in higher education lies in its capacity to sustain and nurture the authentic spirituality of the spiritual life of the public, to cultivate habits of thinking and dialogue and exploration that enhance the well-being of society by providing it with new ideas, inventions, and practices of relationality that enable us to flourish. The life and the death of Socrates have long stood as a reminder that free inquiry, intellectual humility, and responsible dialogue have always been the greatest threat to demagoguery and the best hope for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost Long. We will now hear from Chancellor Mnookin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cantwell. And I think my comments fit rather well with Chris's, with Provost Long's. So I'm delighted to follow him, and it's been interesting to hear my fellow panelists. The question I'm taking up is, how can public research universities support democratic pluralism and foster engagement across differences of identity and belief and viewpoint? And I want to begin with a story. Last week, I had dinner with a group of 10 students and a faculty facilitator who've been gathering around once a month for the past 6 months to discuss third rail controversial issues, things like gun control, immigration, abortion. Our group was one of about 20 in the room. Each had been together over the course of the year, meeting about once a month on these topics. And each included students from a variety of backgrounds and many different spots on the political spectrum. And we've been running 2 groups of these, so a couple of hundred students in all. We call these deliberation dinners. And each group of students is selected to ensure viewpoint diversity, political and otherwise, within each group. And the faculty facilitators work with support and training to engage them to be able to discuss controversial and often emotional issues in a way that's productive and that recognizes each person's humanity. Not to change minds, but to give people the experience of trying to get to know and learn from and with those who may see the world pretty differently from themselves. We piloted these dinners last year and then doubled their size this year. And we're now in discussions about whether we're in a position to do any further expansion, because the results have been really quite remarkable. One student who tilted perhaps to the left told me after a deliberation that focused on abortion, an issue that she felt very strongly about, that she understood for the first time where people on the other side of that issue were really coming from, and that the evening had meant a lot to her. Another wrote recently, and I'm quoting here, "I often view the progressive left as moral grandstanders, not worthy of my respect. But after having conversations with many of them through these dinners, I've learned that they're people like me with good intentions, and I hope they realize that in me too." In some ways, that shouldn't be a lot to ask of one another. And yet in this moment, in the broader world, and sometimes on our campuses too, I think it is. So sitting in on that dinner that evening, and I attended one other over the course of this year as well, and it's confirmed 2 things for me. First, that pluralism can be a powerful antidote to polarization. And second, that there's really no place on earth better situated to promote pluralism, as well as that sifting and winnowing that we talk about a lot here at UW-Madison, and that Chris also mentioned. There's no place to do that better than a big, complicated public research university with an asterisk that we have to figure out how we define that, with a nod to Dominique. But these are places where there are many different ways of seeing the world, from different disciplines, from different perspectives, and that we're bringing people together in an intentional way for the purpose of learning and engagement. That can be cacophonous at times, no doubt, as everybody listening with us today is aware. But it also may be one of our best tools and best institutions through which to fight polarization by creating pathways that can bring people together across their differences. Ideally, not just for one afternoon or one debate or a series of dinners, but for common projects and activities that build relationships and cultivate understanding, and also teach people that you don't have to agree with someone about everything to work together with them productively on something, which I think is an important perspective. Of course, we need more than just tools, and we also need to be candid with ourselves about how well we are doing at this and what we might need to do better or differently. Ibu Patel is the CEO of Interfaith America. As it happens, he'll be speaking on my campus later this afternoon. And he invites us in his essay, How to Put a Country Back Together, to think about how well we're preparing our students to engage productively and seek common ground in the face of deep divisions. He writes, and I'm quoting, "If a chair of a school board or the president of a city council that's tearing itself apart over identity differences were to come to a university leader and say, I want to know how different people can learn from one another without coming to blows. Can I spend a week on your campus to see what that looks like? Our universities, he says, should feel confident that their students are up to the task." So are we? If I ask myself his question, my honest answer is I'm not yet fully confident, but I do think it's an important area for us to focus on and address, that we need to reach a point where we can model excellence in this realm. And that will take concerted effort in a moment when we're already pedaling as fast as we can, and in the face of some challenges that feel incredibly threatening to discourse and even free speech and dialogue. And so I want to acknowledge that as well. But as Professor Austin pointed out in her opening remarks, in a time of great challenge, there are also opportunities. And I believe that one of those opportunities is to prepare our students to listen productively, to question their assumptions, and to work on solutions that try to pull people together rather than pulling them apart. I know that's easier said than done in a moment when the drumbeat of questions about the very value of our universities grows ever louder. Probably most of us here today are aware of the precipitous decline in public trust and confidence in higher education over the past decade that has been sharp, frankly. In a Pew Research survey conducted about a year ago, just 36% of respondents indicated that they have a great deal or quite a lot of trust in higher education, down from nearly 60% a decade ago. A variety of polls show that there's a partisan divide in how people answer, a variety of polls show that there's a partisan divide in how people answer these questions. Distrust of us, universities, public and private, research and otherwise, is greatest among those who identify as Republicans, but distrust has been increasing steadily across all political groups. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that. To be sure, distrust in all institutions has been increasing, not just higher ed, and it's important to recognize that too. And most polls do show that the population likes or has more trust in higher ed than Congress. So I guess that's something, but it's not enough. This is a true and potentially existential threat, and we're seeing that on the federal level and for many at the state and local level as well. And I'm struck by the number of people in broader communities who feel angry and unseen and somewhat unheard by us and the way that we've engaged. There's way too many reasons for this decline in trust and confidence for me to try to detail, and I certainly don't have all the answers. But I'll name a couple of matters that I think are relevant to the question of how we support pluralism and engagement across our differences. The first goes back more than 50 years, and it's both an incredibly positive development and a challenge. And that is a movement away from any kind of shared sense of a traditional academic, literary, or disciplinary canon. We have a much broader and more inclusive conception of whose voices are and should be heard, whose texts and stories matter. And by and large, I think that's an incredibly good and necessary thing. But it also produces challenges for the project of creating shared community. And I think we should acknowledge that too. To build community in the absence of shared sense of foundational texts or a core curriculum, it means it's more challenging. I don't think impossible, but a little bit harder to do. And we see similar dynamics with, say, the media. There's no longer broadly shared sources of trusted information. So we have to ask, how do we create shared spaces of engagement and respect when there's more polyphony around, when there's not as much shared conception or understanding? And of course, we do have to always ask, whose perspectives are shaping these conversations? Whose voices aren't we hearing? What skills do our students need to connect across their differences? How can we create space for constructive learning from one another? A second factor that I think has given rise to distrust in higher education is the perceived lack of intellectual diversity on our campuses, the sense that we have a tilt. For some, that might be a function of history. That might be about who's gone to graduate school over the last generation or two. But there's a sense that we sometimes do silence dissenters or erode the very principles that we purport to value, like evidence-based inquiry, academic freedom, and the free exchange of ideas. And while I don't think that those criticisms are I don't think they're entirely fair. And I think on our universities, we in fact do have deep commitments to all of those things. I think there is some degree of validity to those critiques, and that we have to acknowledge that as well. My university, like many of yours, conducts periodic surveys of our own students. And the most recent did show a significant gap between the extent to which our most liberal and our most conservative students felt comfortable speaking out in class and sharing their views. Also concerning, when asked whether invited speakers with viewpoints that might be offensive to some people should be disinvited, a minority, but a significant minority of our students said yes. And we see similar statistics broadly across universities, even large public research institutions that should be places that have a commitment to breadth and pluralism as relatively foundational values. Does that mean we should just want, extremists who are throwing darts or attacking people? Of course not. But we should have an understanding that, in fact, sometimes to sift and winnow, to engage deeply, to pursue ideas, we may have to risk even, offense or harm. Because to get ideas on the table, we can't just stay entirely in safe spaces. And one person's comfortable view might actually be causing offense to someone else. So we want to figure out, how do we broaden the table? How do we participate more broadly while still having as a commitment that we want to be civil to each other? We want to engage in civic disagreement. We want to help people explore ideas, different ideas, without beginning by demonizing or attacking the speakers. If you believe, as I do, that we have a responsibility as public research universities to develop our students' ability to weigh evidence and engage productively with opinions different from their own, even in moments that feel very challenging, it invites the question, how can we do better? And I think that this is a set of questions that a variety of institutions, both public and private, and including mine, are trying to think about. Some are further along, some are just beginning. We at UW-Madison are probably somewhere in the middle. I've told you a bit about deliberation dinners. Something else we're doing simultaneously is challenging the assumption sometimes that classroom discussions can grow organically from the course materials, and that don't require any special skill to facilitate productive conversations. The research shows that discussions are themselves an academic skill that can be taught. We're really lucky at UW-Madison to have one of the world's leading experts in this area, Professor and Dean Emerita Diana Hess, who's built what we call the Discussion Project, an evidence-based curriculum that teaches teachers to create productive and engaging learning environments in areas ranging from chemistry to political science, not just in spaces where there's likely to be, say, political or cultural controversy, but more broadly. More than 1,000 of our faculty and staff have gone through it, and we brought the curriculum to a number of other schools. And for a number of the participants, it's been a game changer. One of our own faculty wrote this, and I'm quoting, "I'm not exaggerating when I say it's changed my life. This made me think differently about my teaching, and I'm quite sure the students' experience is all the better for it." Of course, our work to create spaces for productive discussion have to reach beyond our classrooms and out into the world. And so I'll close by telling you about one more program that we've created in my very purple state to help bridge divides in the community, or at least understand them a little bit better, and perhaps, maybe, to help engender a little more trust in the university among those who have their doubts. It's run by our La Follette School for Public Policy, and it's called their Main Street Project. And it brings some faculty into communities across the state to facilitate conversations on controversial issues, again, over dinner. There's actually some research that having these kinds of conversations while you're breaking bread might make them be more effective. In the lead up to the presidential election, the project organized dinners in a variety of places in the state of Wisconsin and brought together about 400 people with diverse beliefs and political viewpoints for some challenging conversations. The frame was that nobody was trying to persuade anyone of anything, but rather to talk and listen and acknowledge and respect disagreements. It brought the La Follette community together, faculty and students working on a common project. And when the faculty director walked through those packed conference halls and heard laughter and engaged conversations, and sometimes people who'd been strangers an hour before hugged at the end, she saw some of them even exchanging contact information so that these conversations could continue. She knew she'd hit upon something powerful to help begin to address the often legitimate feeling that people have that they don't have a lot of spaces for actually engaging with each other and treating views as valued and valid, even if they disagree with them. So this is a start. It's not enough, I don't think, but these are some of the ways that we can begin to answer how public research universities can support democratic pluralism and foster engagement across difference. I think what I'd really like to leave you with is sort of a meta point that I do think we need to take this issue as seriously as we take the incredible research that we do and the ways that we teach students the substance in their majors and in their curricular spaces. I don't think this is optional. I don't think it's just a nice to have. I think it's foundational to what we need from our great research, our great public research universities, for our students, for our institutions, and for our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Mnookin. Professor Woodruff, Dr. Woodruff, you're our final speaker. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to MSU and to Professors Austin and Cantwell. Thank you for conceiving of this conversation and presenting each of the panelists with compelling questions to think through. I've really enjoyed what I've heard so far, and it's really helping me to think a bit more strategically on the future of the public research university. So today I'm going to ask, what role do public research universities have in advancing scientific research to expand frontiers of knowledge? So to begin our thinking, we need to know that teaching, research, and scholarly exploration are the cornerstones of the public university. And to reference back to the 1862 Morrill Act, that established the land-grant institutions in each state to teach agriculture, military tactics, and the mechanic arts to the members of the working class so they could obtain a practical education. Further inculcating research into the public land grants was the creation in 1887 of the Agricultural Experiment Station programs, where our knowledge of hybridization, weed and insect management, and soil and water research was born. So land-grant universities were constructed around the broadening of the kinds of entrants into the university, to research as a core function of the public university. And third, and important to my argument today, is that in 1882, and in 1887, and in every Congress through today, universities have been federally supported in a bipartisan way to enable scientific discoveries. That federal support is pooled funds of the individuals of the country, our tax dollars, used in our shared best interests to do things an individual cannot accomplish on their own. The fundamental idea then, and debated now, is that the public is made better by fundamental and applied research that is supported by all of us. So how is the public research accomplished today? Research is supported by nearly all the traditional branches of government through congressionally allocated funds to the NIH and NSF, with additional dollars targeting specific work through USAID, DoD, Department of Energy, Department of Education, NASA, USDA, etc. Nearly all of our parts of government contract with research universities to solve problems. Indeed, one of the reasons America has led in research is that the central government doesn't try to do all the work on its own. The NIH has laboratories that account for 10% of the research budget, with the remaining dollars allocated to scientists in every state of the nation. And that research is programmatically directed, or it is untargeted basic research. A good example of directed research is this nation's war on cancer. In 1971, Richard Nixon declared a war on cancer and to finding cures by studying the disease in each organ. In 1971, a cancer diagnosis was a death sentence, particularly for young individuals. Today, the 5-year survival rate for adolescent and young adult patients is 85%. This improvement in life expectancy is the direct result of increases in our understanding of the origins of cancer and the development of new chemotherapeutics and biologics, a term that didn't exist in 1971, and better uses of radiotherapy and other atomic treatments. And for all the research that is targeted to a particular problem, an equal amount of work is done in an unstructured way. NIH doesn't dictate what question to ask. Scientists ask the next most reasonable question and pursue it to its logical endpoint. My own research in this fundamental or untargeted science arena led to the development of a field of medicine called oncofertility, fertility management for young cancer patients. Young cancer patients who now survive their disease because of the research done by scientists in the decades before me. Well, I'm a reproductive scientist and was funded to ask this question: how are the ovarian follicles of the female reproductive cycle controlled over decades of life? This is a critical question to ask because it tells us something about our biology, but it has nothing to do with cancer patients. I didn't know that I could apply this work to help children and young adults with cancer when I began, nor did the NIH, nor did my graduate students. But we know that asking the right fundamental questions opens new vistas to understanding, creating new content in our textbooks for us to teach and to learn, and adds to the possibility of new drugs and treatments that improves the health of the population. Today, across the globe, young cancer patients are not only surviving their cancer, but they are also provided options for the post-cancer survivorship years, including fertility options for family building long into their future. Our system of targeted problems like cancer and untargeted scientific discovery, like the ways ovarian follicles grow in an ovary, are direct evidence of the way knowledge accrues. It does not amortize. It's like compound interest. You get more out than you put in. I did this work as a professor and a research scientist at Northwestern University while I was teaching undergraduates and graduate students. I truly believe that at our public research universities and our great universities, great research is interoperable with great teaching. Fundamentally, we teach both what is known and how to ask questions and solve problems. Learning what went before is what I call horizontal learning. You open a book and learn the answers to questions asked in the past. Vertical learning occurs when you teach a student how to tackle the unknown, how to ask questions, how to value evidence, how to understand the limits of knowledge, and not be afraid when new evidence suggests a different path. A society that enables this kind of teaching and learning is a confident society, and one that is investing in itself and its future. Fundamental, unstructured basic research and applied research accomplished in our great universities taught to students funded by taxpayers who want better for their neighbors, creates the possibility for new fields of medicine, a healthier and more knowledgeable and more intellectually engaged population. Well, some have argued that we should let industry do the research. At one point, there was research in private companies, but that came largely to an end when Bell Labs, the most successful research enterprise funded by a company, was broken up. Shareholders wanted value, and fundamental science does not provide a quarterly report that can be easily monetized. Curiosity-driven research at Bell Labs in the 40 years before the breakup ultimately led to inventions such as the transistor, laser, photovoltaic cells, and the award of 11 Nobels, among other notable outcomes. And those scientists were trained in the great universities of America. Since that time, the private sector has not followed the Bell Labs model of deep investment in fundamental research. Today's corporations instead utilize the discoveries that have been made in universities, and every employee comes from these same universities. And the reason corporations can afford to focus on applications and markets is because they rely on public research universities for these unstructured discoveries, for those discoveries that effort alone can't make. This economic value proposition was laid out in a report commissioned during World War II entitled Science, the Endless Frontier. Its author, Vannevar Bush, laid out the virtuous cycle that is at the core of America's successes, wherein taxpayer-supported fundamental research in universities provides the driving forces for the growth of a robust and highly innovative economic system. The roles of universities in this growth cycle are threefold. First, they provide the essential feedstock of high-value employees for industry. Second, through unstructured research, publication, and patenting, the results they provide are the breakthrough ideas that advance the health and well-being of the taxpayers who provide the support. And third, each dollar of the government grant to a university generates about $2.50 of local economic activity. In these ways, universities are an essential part of the robust and highly innovative economy in the United States, far exceeding what might have been done even in the best of corporate America. Today, we are realizing the fruits of that virtuous ecosystem that America adopted and are prepared to push the boundaries of knowledge and application further than could be imagined. A confident country invests in its future. It wants short-term gains, but it also invests in long-term greatness. Research in public universities has made America healthier and smarter. It has ensured that young women who would have been sterilized by their cancer treatment now survive and are able to have families in their expectant future. Adaptation is being done by universities as the way in which federal funds flow is being reimagined. As an industry, we are reassessing the infrastructure of research, the kind of research, the number of trainees, and entrants into that research domain. We are a nation of thinkers and of problem solvers, and our great public universities will continue to make the argument that taxpayers' interests are best served by a vibrant research agenda in the public sphere. So, what role do public research universities have in advancing scientific research to expand frontiers of knowledge? The ideals of the Morrill Act, signed during the depths of the Civil War, still hold true, that an education including research principles will make every state of this nation greater, generation after generation. And the endless frontiers of science, imagined during World War II, is even more true today, that public research is an economic engine for the nation. Public universities are the holders of each of these promises, and those promises are to us, to our neighbors, and to our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Woodruff. This was a wonderful set of contributions and conversation. And right now I want to kick it back to you for a quick 1-2 minute response to some idea that you heard. And I'm going to start with Provost Long.
All right, thank you, Brendan. So let me pull a thread maybe through all of the remarks that were made. Just thank you all for amazing remarks and food for thought. And that theme is the theme of trust. Trust is not easy to cultivate, and it is very easy to lose. Dr. Baker, when you were talking about these 4 moments in the history of higher education in the United States, those are moments in which we are trying and succeeding to some degree and falling short in other ways to live up to the promise of the ideals we say we care most deeply about as a country. And in that context, I often go back to James Baldwin when he says, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." And I really appreciate your calling attention to those efforts to do this work in ways that are more consistent with the things we say we care about. And Dr. Lee, you were emphasizing the importance not only of the presence of our international students, and I really appreciate expanding our vision to a global perspective. And when I was talking about Socrates, I often, when I use the language of citizen there, the danger is that's seen in contemporary international context as opposed to global citizen, the notion of a global citizen of the world. So I appreciated the point that you were making there, and also the point that it's not just, even though it might be compelling to some, about the revenue generated by the presence of our international students, but more importantly, about the relationships that we develop with them that lead then to these discoveries that you mentioned are so important. And Chancellor Mnookin, you emphasized the lived experience of pluralism. That is not an easy endeavor, and it does require trust, and trust is earned in relationality, in real human connection, which is probably why dinners are important, and why the challenge that we face to do this at scale is really rooted in the human interactions that we have. And then, Teresa, I was really moved by the notion of a confident society, and the sense that this work, the work of higher education, requires standing on the ground that we know aligns our values with our practice, and doing the difficult vertical learning of pressing into the unknown, recognizing that we're pressing together to have a deeper understanding of the world that we share. So thank you all.
Thank you. Vice President Lee, Dr. Lee, response from you.
Sure. I think Dr. Long captured and reflected so well. I was looking at the questions, and I know we won't have time to answer them. They're such good questions. And so that also caused me to reflect a little bit on how this is all interrelated and what we're experiencing today. And really the challenges that we're experiencing, that we're talking about or afraid to talk about, it really generally reflects the failure of higher education to demonstrate our value proposition to society. And there's this false dichotomy out there of liberals versus conservatives, and higher education serving one at the expense of the other, when actually they're not really correlated. Personal opinions do not determine impact. We may not agree with where our food comes from, but we eat it anyways. And I think that we can do more in just demonstrating that value we have to everyday people. So a couple things where we could work on that better. Someone had asked about some of the more permanent challenges to foresee. Personally, I'm concerned about the cuts to our facilities and administrative, known as indirect costs to our grants. The public doesn't really understand, what is all this fluff money? Where does it go? It goes to our libraries, it goes to IT, it goes to ensuring that we have strong export controls and preventing us from intellectual property theft. I mean, these are things that need to be articulated. What are the consequences when these things happen? And I think we need to demonstrate that better. And so if you're a graduate student or researcher, maybe we need to move away from disaggregating data and ask these kind of big questions that we're all being confronted with now. Another misconception, someone had asked about athletics. My opinion is I think the public will be more outraged if we close an athletics program than an academic department. Athletics is often our best outreach in connecting with everyday people who do not have college degrees and wondering why are we taking up so much space and money in the state. So I think that really understanding and connecting with those whose opinions, as mentioned many times, whose opinions we may not share, but really need to help convey in terms of why we exist. Otherwise, we will continue to be threatened.
Thank you very much. I'm just picking names. Professor Woodruff.
Well, thank you. I took away a lot from each of the speakers, and Chris did a great job of summarizing. And I think the thread that I would also pull is that of trust. And it does feel like it is a moment where trust is the commodity that we all most need. And I think in some of the research that Chancellor Mnookin was referencing, some of those data indicate that trust is at different length scales. So you trust those best who are near you. You like the University of Wisconsin if you're in the University of Wisconsin system, but you don't like the University of Illinois. And, so that length scale really matters. So bringing more of us into the main street, as Chancellor Mnookin mentioned, having those conversations that are consequential, both in times that are heightened as we have now, but also in the everydayness of what we do, finding that as a value proposition for each of us who are within higher education, I think is really quite meaningful. And I often think of higher education as the extension of K through 16, and then onward as this program itself really represents that we can always continue to learn. So making sure that we have that value proposition of learning underpins trust. And so I think that is a theme that I hear and is one that I would highlight as part of our kind of summary of what was said.
Thanks very much. Dr. Baker?
Sure, I'll try to be quick because I want to make sure that Dr. Mnookin has opportunity to chat as well. So I'll say, or professor, right? You're in law. Okay, I want to be a Juris Doctorate. I'm gonna call you a doctor anyways. Yeah, live it up.
You have a PhD and a JD, so you can.
I am so sorry. Look at you out here. Okay. Yes. Get those double degrees. I love it. Okay. So my very quick things are that I think it's really important when I'm thinking about differing views and how I synthesize that for my students, how I help my students communicate. I'm always cautious to think about what those views are. There are differing views that are, right, how our tax system should be used, whether or not a Department of Education should exist. There are also views about whether or not I, as a Black woman, should exist as a person in this country, whether or not I should be considered a citizen of this country. And so I think it's also important that when I am thinking about how we communicate about higher education and how it threads these needles, that I try to be really careful about how I think about the difference between a difference of opinion on some policy points and a difference of opinion about whether or not I am a human being. And so that's one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, because that's not to say that there are students within higher education. There are people within higher education that do not think that I should exist as a human being, right? That's a challenge that I think we have to confront. I think we have to be upfront with ourselves about that as a reality. And then I'll just segue to also mention that as we talk a lot about communication, right? I've spent the past 3 years doing a lot of reading in like communication studies, media studies, those types of things, trying to better understand how higher education is communicated about to broader publics. And, the very short version of that is that like press releases don't work, right? Like, this is about things like local TV spots, as Dr. Lee mentioned, recently being on. This is about person-to-person conversations. This is about things like collective action on college campuses where faculty that are able to unionize are able to figure out the best ways to communicate with the communities that they live in. So I think it's really important to think about what does communication look like in broad strokes, keeping in mind that there are varying degrees of what sort of differing of opinions can mean.
Thanks much. And Chancellor Mnookin?
Thanks for this very rich discussion. And I learned a lot listening to everybody. I'm sorry we don't have more time for questions. There's some great questions in the chat. I agree that trust is a through line, and I think that's a really valuable one. And I think we need to think hard about how we get it, how we keep it, how we've lost it, and we need to care about all of the above. I also agree with what I've heard from several and Dr. Baker's comments at the end. We need to articulate values and value propositions, but I also think we need to be really careful about not so a fundamental belief in the dignity of all people. I think we should stand up for and adhere to and believe in. And I appreciate that there are some at outer edges who may in fact be pushing back against that. And we should say that is not a perspective that fits with the core values and pre-commitments and presuppositions at a university because of that which a university is and that which a university does and because of who we are. But I also think we should be actually really, really careful at not taking those fundamental values and too quickly turning those in to positions on policy issues of our time. And if I'm honest about it, I think at our universities, we've sometimes been a little quick to go from A to B, to say that to have a view on immigration that is different from that which is dominant in our space is to deprecate and derogate those who are themselves immigrants. And I think we need to be really careful about that step, because I think that step is part of how we've lost trust with people who don't tend to share some of the dominant perspectives inside our space. So I partly agree with you. I don't mean to say it's just, we should just, no matter what happens, no matter what horrible things get said or the ways people harm one another, we're entirely neutral about that. But I think one of the wrong turns that we've taken is to think it's too quick or too obvious that sets of views that many people who share some of those fundamental 30,000 views, foot views that we have, but disagree about the means or the particulars, we push outside of our communities of discourse. And I think that is part of how we've lost trust. I recognize there's dynamics of power. I recognize there's dynamics of vulnerability. I don't think this is easy, but I do think that thinking about pluralism and thinking about how we invite people in more robustly to have exactly those conversations in a thoughtful way is a stepping stone on our way back to gaining trust. So I'm sorry we don't have more time to engage and constructively agree or disagree about that, but I really appreciate the chance for the conversation.
I want to thank all of the participants for wonderful insights, rich experience, and thinking about public research universities in varied aspects. And I think offering comments that are resonant to the context that we're operating in right now. Rather than asking questions, because we are out of time, and several of the questions were addressed directly or indirectly in remarks. So thanks panelists for being real good at this and getting to that. I want to leave us with two questions that came to us as we were listening and learning from you, and as we were looking at the questions that were percolating up from the participants. And the first, it's a two-part of the same question, I think. But the first is, what can we do? How can we communicate? What are the things that we can do tangibly, practically to demonstrate what public research universities do and why we believe they're important to the broader public? What can we do? What are some tangible communication or action steps that we can take to change public opinion? Yes, we have to acknowledge it, but we also might want to say, hey, we think that there's a way to better inform you and for you to better understand what we do and why we exist. So what are those things that we can do? The other thing is, what can we do to build resilient communities inside of our universities? Among our students, among the faculty and staff. Some of the commenters used metaphors of the weather, and they said, we're facing gale force winds, or we're steering into heavy headwinds. And what can we do to navigate those conditions, the oncoming, the incoming, so that we remain strong communities that are resilient and prepared to serve the public? And so those are the questions I'll leave us with. Travis, if you could just put up our slide for our next presentation, just as a reminder. For anyone who is watching at home, you can quickly pull out your phone and take a picture of that. So we've got questions about the academic profession, a great set of speakers for that as well. And so take a moment to register for that now if you're interested, and not to take any more time, but I just want to have a round of applause for everybody, and just to thank everybody for their time and their generosity and their participation today. And we can take down the slide. So thanks, everybody. Thanks to our great colleagues who participated, and for everyone who took the time to be here.
Thanks so much.
Great appreciation to all. We're inspired and energized to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.